Going to make what I call a dinner, an early dinner for us, mixing our lunch. But we're going to do lamb burgerettes with an orzo pasta with some fresh tomatoes and herbs from my garden and spinach. So just kind of a lighter fare since we're going to the movies tonight. And then we're going to make up some chocolate chip scones using our sourdough discard. So I'm going to start by getting our orzo cooking in our water here. There we go. We don't need to pour the whole thing in because I will say orzo balloons up pretty big, and we're kind of doing a light one. So I'm just going to do half mine, so like a half pound. We're going to add it in. You do need to cook orzo in a lot of water because it like really grows inside. So I used about a half a container of, or a package of orzo here. And if you're not familiar with orzo, orzo is a pasta that looks a lot like rice. It grows in size, but it still tastes like a regular pasta noodle. But it's lovely, I think, with sautéed veggies or even in pasta salads. So while that is cooking, let's start making our base for our scones. So we're gonna start out with our flour. We need 2 cups of flour, and we're gonna add that in here because we're gonna cut our butter into it because our scones are gonna kind of have nice flaky layers. So we need 2 cups of all-purpose flour. So 1, and 2. And then we need a half a cup of sugar. And we will use a little bit more sugar later to dust over the top of our scones, but we just need a half a cup for right now. And if you've never had a scone before, think of a hybrid between a biscuit and a cookie. So they're sweeter than a biscuit, but not as sweet as a cookie. And they have a nice kind of flaky inside like a biscuit, but they have a nice kind of crunchy outside like a cookie. So they're like a hybrid. And then we're gonna add in 2 teaspoons of baking powder. We got 1 and 2, and then a half a teaspoon of salt. And then I'm just gonna use my pastry cutter to kind of stir this up to get it all kind of mixed around so that when I cut my stick of butter into it, I'll be cutting it into the powder that has all been mixed up. So it's kind of the same as sifting, but I'm just gonna do it lazy man style. There we go. Now we're gonna take 1 stick of cold butter. So you want really cold, firm butter, and we're gonna cut this into our mixture, and then we'll use our pastry cutter to cut it up to nice small pieces. I always like to start out with cutting it, quartering it with a butter knife first. It just makes it a little bit easier to chop it up. But of course, you could always use a food processor for this if you wanted to. Whoop. Lost it. Let's bring it back up here. And just losing them both ways, we can just kind of cut them up here. It just makes it easier instead of having to start off with a big honkin' stick. I just kind of cube it up into it. That way it makes it easier to get to the pieces no bigger than a pea. And you really need to do cold butter. That's gonna give you the flaky layers. If you use room temperature butter, your scone just won't sit well. So cold butter, just like with biscuits and whatnot, because these are very similar process to making these as you do with like cut out biscuits. Okay, so now I'm gonna take my pastry cutter here and I'm going to push it in and cut over that butter several times until we have no butter chunks bigger than a pea. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna disperse my butter throughout, and then when we do our press and folds, those will create nice, lovely, flaky layers. And then when we bake it up, of course, it will all come and melt together as one. There we go. So we're doing our dry, we're cutting all of our butter into our dry ingredients, and then we'll mix our wet ingredients together in another bowl, and then we'll gently add them together. Okay, I'm gonna take my butter knife now, and we're gonna go through and just take out any butter that's stuck between the blades. I always do this a couple of times throughout the process because that butter does like to get stuck. And I don't want to lose any of that delicious butter. And we're doing chocolate chip scones today, which I find my kids really like them. And they always say, they're like, it's like a chocolate chip cookie, but not as sweet. And I was like, and that's exactly pretty much what they kind of taste like. I will say chocolate chip scones are one of my favorite ways to do it. I do like fruity ones, but for a nice, you know, hearty one, chocolate chips are just a classic. There we go. We should have this all pretty much cut up. Okay, we're gonna go back through with my butter knife and get any pieces here. Perfect. Got it all out. And then we're gonna do our wet ingredients, but before we move to the wet ingredients, I am going to give my pasta a little stir because I don't want any of that orzo to sit down at the bottom and get stuck to my pot. Let's put these right here. Let me grab another little bowl. And this is gonna be for our wet ingredients. So we are going to start off with a 1/2 cup of sourdough discard. So when you're making sourdough bread and you've got your starter, you have to feed it. And before you feed it, you're supposed to throw away half of it. So instead of throwing it away, you can use the discard in several different recipes. And it adds good, like natural bacteria to your food that gives you those like prebiotics and probiotics, so that give you that good gut health, as well as a nice flavor, and it prevents waste. So we've got a 1/2 cup of our sourdough discard in here. There we go. Slide this out of the way. I'm always afraid I'm gonna knock it over. Okay. So 1/2 cup. Now we're gonna add in some heavy cream. Cream is what you want. You really, if you cut down to 1/2 and 1/2 or even milk, it's much thinner, so you have to use a little bit less. So really stick with cream. We're going to be using a 2 teaspoons there, a 1/4 cup of cream. Where I'm gonna look, I gotta find my little line in here, my measuring cup. There we go. So a 1/4 cup of cream, but we're gonna brush 2 tablespoons on later, so you're gonna need a little bit more cream, but it's not a whole bunch. So just a 1/4 cup of cream. We're gonna mix it in here. There we go. So it's, again, this is not gonna be a super wet batter, it's gonna have a dry shag to it. Then we're gonna add in 1 egg. Here we go. And then 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. So 1. We're gonna use it. I think I have just enough for 2 teaspoons. Look at that. I like it. There we go. So 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Let me grab a spoon. We're gonna mix this up, and then we're gonna add this mixture to our dry mixture. So just kind of pop your yolk. You wanna make sure you have your whole sourdough kind of diluted down with the egg and the milk and everything mixture, because when we add this, we wanna minimize the amount of mixing that we do. Because you don't wanna mix a lot when it comes to making like the sourdough, or the scone part, because that's gonna cause it to get really stiff, and you want a nice like fluffy area or scone. There we go. So I've got that egg just about mixed in there. I can see one little egg white part is just fighting me on the mixing process. There we go. Okay, and now we're gonna add this mixture to our dry mixture, and then it's gonna create a loose kind of shag, and then we'll add in our chocolate chips. We'll scoop this all in here. Okay. I'm gonna use a fork to kind of start the toss and turn of the mix. And we're just gonna mix it a little bit Don't cream it, don't use a hand mixer, just lightly stir it. Again, it's gonna come up and be kind of a drier shag, but then we're gonna do our press and folds to create our little pucks for our scones. Okay, so we've got our nice little dry shag here. Now we're gonna add in a cup of chocolate chips, which I'm kind of just gonna measure with my hand. So this is about a half a cup. That should be about a cup, give or take. You can add more or less. Mini also work really well if you have the mini ones. They work great in this as well. So we're gonna give these a nice little toss, kind of mix it up here. And now we're gonna put this out, fold it out onto our counter here, and we're gonna start doing our press and folds. So let me clear off a little room. Okay, so this is the dry shag that we have, which is what you want. With scones, you don't want a wet batter because then you'll just have a mush cookie kind of things. So what we're gonna do is, it's called the press and fold technique. So we're just gonna press and fold our ingredients together. Don't knead. The kneading will create a stiff end product. And what you want are flaky layers. So every time you press this flour and this butter down, it creates a new layer. And trust me, it will all come together in just a few short minutes. The pressing and it holding it together. And then we'll shape 2 pucks, because I always make mini scones instead of great big scones, because A, you can eat more and feel like you've had a better treat. And B, I feel like they cook up nicer. The bigger ones, I feel like, don't have the right texture. They can be too doughy in the middle or too crunchy on the outside.
You have a question. Are you a professional chef?
I am not a professional chef. I've just been doing this for a really long time. I started cooking for my family when I was 13 years old. I started taking over 1 meal a night or a week. And then I just slowly took on more and more, and I absolutely love it. But no, I never have been trained. I have plenty of degrees in other things, but not in cooking. But I will say, I read all the magazines growing up, Fine Cooking, Gourmet, and I loved watching all those cooking shows as a kid. It's a passion. I love it. Okay, so here are our 2 pucks that we are going to cut up into our little mini scones.
You got a question? Are you going to be making any snacks beforehand for the trip?
I am. I actually have, I'm going to be making several snacks for the trip, so I am. I have a whole list of all the different things that I'm going to be making. We'll make granola bars. I was going to make puppy chow and Chex Mix. I was going to dehydrate and make some jerky for the camping trip. And so I have kind of like my base list, and then I was gonna look around and think about what else could be made. I might make a batch of banana donuts before we have to go, because I have some bananas that look like they're gonna be ready. So I'm gonna just push those last ones in.
And where are you going?
We are going to, this is our kind of a national forest, national park camping trip. So we're going to the Indiana Dunes National Park, the Nicollet National Forest, Chickamauga National Forest, Ottawa National Forest, and then we're gonna go up to Voyageurs National Park up at the tip of Minnesota, and then we will finish off at Chippewa National Forest before heading to my sister's lake house. Okay, so we've got quite an adventure. So now we're gonna cut these into our little shapes for our scones.
You have a question? Do you guys stay in a camper?
We do not. We all stay in an 8-person tent. So there's 7 of us, and we've got mattresses, little like mattresses, cots. Our 20-month-old will be in a pack and play. That's what he did last year, and it worked out really well. And the rest is kind of we're in there nice and snug. So good thing we like each other. But no, we do like real camping.
Are your parents gonna go with us?
No. Although when I was younger, my mom took, us and her, like she has 7 kids, so I'm like the youngest of 10, but she had 7. And she took us on big camping trips by herself, but no, those days are long gone.
Shane's sending you a bunch of stuff. You just had a cowboy hat and a mustache.
Thank you, Shane. But no, my mom, I think, is with time she could do glamping. I don't think she would do camping anymore. Even when we were a kid, we did the camping, and she had this big old air mattress that we had to like pump up between campsites, and we did like a bunch of national parks too. And yeah, we weren't even allowed pillows. Our pillows were were pillowcases that we stuffed with our clothes, so it wouldn't take up as much room. So you'd like wake up with like a zipper and a button. I'm like, I'm letting my kids have some pillows at least. Well, let me get a small bowl. So no, and my stepfather is not one to join on. He prefers peace and quiet. His dream is like find a secluded lake in the middle of nowhere where nobody can bother him, including us. So we're gonna take our cream here and we're gonna brush it on the top of our scones. Here we go.
No, my bad. Not Shane. Shan, short for Shannon.
Oh, Shan. Okay, well, thank you, Shannon. I'm glad you corrected my husband, when he makes those assumptions. There we go. We're going to brush the tops with cream. This is going to give it a nice golden color. And then we'll sprinkle a little bit of sugar on it, which gives them a little bit more sweetness. I will say scones are not super sweet, which makes them, I think, a nice treat when you over a cookie, which can really be pretty sweet. And now we're going to sprinkle with a little bit of sugar. You don't need a lot of sugar for this. Like, we'll use less than a tablespoon for these 2 things. It's just a pinch and a little crust on it. And a little goes a long way.
I do have a question. Do you make homemade croissants?
I have made croissants before. And I will tell you, the last time I made croissants was with my mom. And this was back in high school. And we were making homemade croissants and Danish pastries for Easter. And let's just say my mom and I are not great cooks together in the kitchen. And we vowed never to make croissants ever again after that because we had differing opinions on it. And mine were right. I'm going to bake these at 400 for 18 minutes. But I will say I've been getting an itch to make croissants again. It had that that experience at that time. And I've never made them since then. And I love croissants. So I definitely think I want to try them and do them well. I will say my croissants turned out perfect that weekend. Somebody else's did not. I'm going to taste my Orzo, see if it's nice and ready. Still needs a little bit longer. Orzo takes a lot longer to cook than you think. It's right now almost to an al dente, and that's what I want, but we're going to cook it for maybe a minute or 2 longer. I'm going to wash my hands. We've got our scones in, 18 minutes at 400. And let's start getting we're going to sautéing up an onion, and then we're going to make our burgerettes for our dinner tonight. So I kind of coined my term of a burgerette, which is just a way to do meatballs on the stove versus like baking them in the oven, so you can get that crispy shell on, like outer crust on it. But instead of doing them in a ball shape, you do them in a little mini patty, a little burgerette, and it just cooks up so much nicer, and they stay together, they keep their form. I'm gonna mince up some yellow onion, and this is gonna be for our Orzo pasta. I'm gonna have it start like sautéing, caramelize, bring out some flavors, because we're gonna keep it pretty simple today. We're just gonna use some, grape tomatoes, fresh herbs from our garden, and spinach, and just keep it kind of a really simple pasta, since we are gonna go to the movies and indulge on popcorn and more popcorn, especially now that you can put your own butter on the popcorn. I did though we went to the movies the other day and I let my son butter the popcorn, and he did really great on one spot, And then there was no butter anywhere else, but that was like a well of butter.
You have a request? When recipes call for either cream or brush with cream or egg wash, what do you prefer?
You know what? I think brushing with cream is easier in the sense that I don't have to waste a whole egg for a little bit, but they do give you a slightly different ones. Cream is gonna give you a muted golden brown, while egg wash is gonna give you a shiny golden brown. So with breads, I find that egg wash works much better. It gives you a much nicer color on it. But with scones, I think that cream does better because it absorbs it a little bit better. So there are it's essentially the same thing, but I will say I like to do the cream more because it's just easier than cracking up and whipping up another egg and wasting a whole egg. But for breads, I do stick with the egg wash because it gives you that nice shiny look to it. Okay, we've got our onions. I'm gonna have them start sauteing up in here. And let's work, well, before we work on we'll make our panade, which is going to be a paste using eggs and bread. So I have 2 pounds of lamb. So we're gonna use 2 slices of bread and 2 eggs for this. And let me grab my cream right over here. And we're gonna soak each slice of bread with cream. You can also use milk or half and half for this. It doesn't have to be cream, but I have cream out, so we're gonna use that. You want your breads to be soaking, like soggy, but not drenched with it. So I don't wanna have a lot of extra cream in there. I just want enough to make a nice paste. That way it will end up like perfect. If you use too much, what will happen is it won't hold together as much. So we've got our 2 slices of bread soaked in cream.
You have a question? Are you going to be going live cooking at the campsite?
We are going to go live as best we can. Now, we don't know what the cell service or reception is going to be out there, but if we can't go live, we will record them and then post the videos via that. I'm hoping that we will have a good service there, but I don't know. We are not staying in the national parks. Now, as much as I would love staying in the national park, having 5 kids and with national parks, it's first come, first serve with campsites, and I can't leave that much to to chance. There we go. I can't. I wanted to make sure we have a place to sleep every night. So we are staying in campsites near. We'll be in some KOAs or other ones. So they all say they have Wi-Fi. So we're not as deserted as would be in the middle of some of the national forests. And as I say, also I kind of like the amenities of having actual bathrooms versus their primitive campsites. So we're not completely roughing it, but we are intense, and we'll have cooking over. I have a little propane kitchen stove, and then we'll do stuff over the fire as well. So our plan is definitely to stream. This right here is sage. So I have picked a bunch of sage from my garden. And this is gonna be about probably 1/4 of a cup once it's chopped up. And we're gonna add this into our panade, which is our bread and egg paste, our bread, egg, and milk paste. Because sage, I find, works really well with lamb. Those flavors just go so good together. Especially with lamb being a bit more gamey, I think the sage plays on that gaminess and just is a great blend. So we've got our panade, or our sage in there. And then we're gonna be using some green onions, some for this and then some for our next one. So we're gonna start, I'm gonna just snip off. I'm gonna use the green tips of them in with our lamb. And then the more whiter parts of the green onions I'm gonna use in our pasta because they'll have a bit more flavor. So we're just gonna snip these in here. And this is just a whole bunch of, when you buy green onions from the store, they come in bunches. So this is just one full bunch. And then I'm gonna leave this part for our pasta. Okay. We're also gonna add in some onion powder. And I'm gonna add in about a tablespoon of it. So I'm gonna do a couple shakes until I I have what I think is visually a tablespoon. And then we're gonna add in some garlic salt. Again, we're gonna add about, I wanna say a tablespoon, so 1.5 teaspoons, because we're gonna flavor up 2 pounds of meat. And with this, you don't wanna under season because you can't add any seasonings back in. Let's give this a stir, and then I'm pretty sure our orzo is ready now. So we're gonna take this. I'm gonna strain it. I'm not gonna use any of the broth today. A lot of times, grab my things, I'll use some broth to save, but today I'm not going to, because we're gonna do kind of just a simple, not a thick sauce on it. Turn off my back burner. And we're gonna strain this. There we go. And then I'm just gonna pour it back in here. And then since we're doing kind of a really light base, I am going to toss these with a little bit of olive oil just to keep them from sticking together. If you have a more thicker sauce, then you don't have to toss them with the olive oil. They can just come undone in the sauce. But since we're gonna have a slightly, like a more of an olive oil based sauce. Okay, we've got our onions sauteing up here. We've got a couple that got a little toasty, but a-okay. Perfect. Let me get this so we can see better. Here, I'm actually gonna go grab a trivet because that burner is still hot. And I don't wanna cook the bottom of it.
You have a question? Does your husband cook?
You know, he can cook a few meals. And when I say a few, he's got like 2. And most of the time, his skills rely on like Papa Bear meals, which are finding stuff in the pantry or refrigerator that is already prepared. You know, he always keeps asking me, you should teach me how to cook. And I feel like him videotaping are things he is learning how to cook more, like he's understanding processes a little bit better. We're gonna add in a little bit of garlic here, about a tablespoon with those juices. I'm gonna turn this all the way down to low. I'm gonna let this kind of simmer nice and low, kind of get a little bit golden. And then we're gonna add in a little bit of a butter, because we're gonna do, remember, it's pretty simple, just a kind of a butter and olive oil base to our sauce, or to our pasta. So about 2 tablespoons, and nice and low. We cooked up our onions, but now we're gonna have this is gonna be kind of the creaminess to our sauce. Let's make our panade now. We've got our herbs and everything in here for our burgerettes. So I'm gonna go in here and we are gonna just smush this all together until it makes a little paste. And this is gonna be the binder for our lamb burgerettes. And so I'm gonna mush it through, and you just sort of break up all those crusts so you don't have any big pieces of bread. But I find this makes a much tender either meatball or burgerette or, you know, base than breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs I think can be really dry in our meat. You know, so I always like to do just bread soaked in milk or cream. Gives you just, I think, a better texture and better, you know, moisture to it. Okay, now that we've got our little panade here, we're gonna add in our lamb. I'm gonna just move my veggie cutting board out. I'm gonna pull my meat one in because we'll be using this to make patties. That way if I get a little spillage, it can go over into that. So we're gonna add in our lamb. So I've got 2 pounds of ground lamb here. And unfortunately for this is the meal that you just have to get your hands in. There's really just no way to make meatballs without getting your hand in there. So let's get all of that good lamb. So 1 pound in, another pound to go. And then we're gonna mix the all that panade, the egg and bread and cream mixture into it. And so the way I do it is 1 egg and 1 slice of bread per pound of meat. And that's across all, like, so whether you're doing ground beef or pork. So that's just my base for making it. And now we're gonna really mix this together. And so this, Again, we seasoned it with onion powder, garlic salt, green onions, and fresh sage. So it should have just some lovely herby flavors to it as well. And we're gonna just kind of mush it all together. And the more you mix, it's gonna really start to come together. So, and that's why it's really important to not make your panade super runny. So minimize the amount of liquid you use, which is why I just try to do it to where your bread, enough to make your bread soggy, but not drenched in it. There we go. So we've got our good base right here. And we're gonna whip out some little burgerettes here. So just little teeny tiny patties. And the way this is kind of like, you could do meatballs in the oven, but this is gonna give you just a nicer cook up on the stove because they'll cook up flat instead of round. So you'll be able to cook them evenly on each side. Give you that nice pan fried crust that you get when you pan fry a meatball, but just an overall better product.
You have a question, and that's lamb?
Yes, this is ground lamb. And ground lamb really just plays really well to, I just love ground lamb, but with sage and everything. Now you could totally do this meal with Italian, like you could do an Italian meatball, or even a pork meatball would work really well with it. I will say when you use ground beef, either cut it with Italian sausage or with pork. I think ground beef by itself, if it's just by itself, it just gives you too much of a hamburger taste, like I'm eating a little burger versus a meatball base. So we're making our little burgerettes here. And they'll shrink up a little bit when you cook them. As with most meat, you know, it has the fat in it, which will kind of reduce out, and the natural liquids. There. Trying to get these all up before my oven timer goes off, so I don't have to wash my hands several times. And then we'll start cooking these up and working on our pasta. Kind of on that halfway point, maybe a little bit further, probably deep down soon. There we go. And we'll go back over, I'll say these also, you can do, I'm doing kind of an Italian themed, you know, more of like a pasta thing. But I also love to make burgerettes and then make homemade naan, and you put them in the naan, and it's like it acts kind of like a pita pocket, and so delicious. So there's a lot of great ways that you could use the ground lamb for.
Do your kids like lamb?
They do. They've actually, I think it's because we've just eaten it growing up, that they love lamb. At Easter we did lamb lollies and lamb chops. We have lamb probably once a week maybe. So we eat it a lot. Maybe not every week, once every 2 weeks. Not just in the ground form. Let me wash my hands real quick. There we go. But we have the lamb roast, like that I'll cut up and we can saute or do as a roast. We also do the lamb chops. And then only at Easter do we do the lamb lollies, because lamb lollies are expensive but delicious. Okay, we've got our butter over here nice and melted. We've got some nice caramelization on our onions. You can see we've got some lovely brown and golden part, delicious. So I'm gonna start turning on my little my skillet over here. Once this is nice and hot, we'll start cooking up our burgerettes. But let me open this. So we're gonna just do enough, kind of a coating on the bottom, maybe like 1.5 tablespoons, just enough to prevent them from sticking. It is a non-stick pan, so they won't stick that much, but still, I always like to have a little bit on there. We're gonna move those to the side, and let's start cutting up. We're gonna toss in our green onions here, and we're gonna let those kind of start cooking up in that butter, really give that nice oniony flavor with the caramelized onions. So we'll get lots of that really delicious onion flavor for the pasta. There we go. I'm gonna just do a couple little quick chops over it so we don't have any super big onion pieces. There we go. I'm gonna add this in. I'm gonna let it simmer. I have my on really low because I don't want my onions and my garlic to kind of crisp up, more of I want them to infuse this butter. But I'm gonna turn it up to a 4 now that I've added in the green onions. We're gonna let them start to kind of cook up and saute. And then we've got some fresh herbs, and we're gonna chop these up and bring these flavors in. I'm gonna do the oregano now, and then we'll add the basil in towards the end so it's a bit more fresh tasting on there. So this is oregano. It's actually both Greek and just regular oregano. So we're gonna add these in. I'm just taking off the big stalks before I mince them up, but I want their flavors to infuse in. And oregano, the flavors will really stick well, where versus the fresh basil can cook up a little faster, so I'm gonna add that towards the end so that it stays a little bit more fresh. There we go. And, okay. And let's take a pause because our scones are calling us.
Several people in the chat are thrown off because you're so early with dinner.
I know, we're early. We've got a movie to get to, and I want to get some real food in before we get there, so they aren't completely filling up on candy and icy and all that jazz. Because it's gonna, you know how it is when you go to the movies. You got to get everything. So here are our beautiful chocolate chip scones made with our sourdough discard. Turn that off. You can see how they puffed up and they're flaky layers. Let me slide this right over here. But they've got that nice golden brown. That's from brushing with the cream. As you can see, they get that golden brown for it. But they're gonna be, I love the mini ones because you're gonna have a nice crisp on the outside, but it should be nice and tender in the middle because you don't have to cook them as long. And then I always love where, now I don't know if I'll let them cool a little bit, but you can see the layers that you've folded in, and that was from the press and fold. So they give you that just delicious layers for it. Okay, let's mince up our oregano here. So we have some just nice smaller bits of it. Now you can always use dried oregano if you want, but I'm aiming for more of a fresh kind of pasta, so I wanted to use fresh today. There we go. So we're gonna add this in, let it kind of infuse into that butter, and then we'll add in our tomatoes, but I want this to kind of go in first because when we add our tomatoes in, they'll start to add out some liquid. And so I want this to kind of hit that butter and kind of infuse it. Okay, looks like our oil should be nice and hot. And we're just I'm gonna turn it down to about a 6. We're gonna add our lamb patties, our little burgerettes on here and let them cook. There. And that's one thing that's nice about them over being a meatball is you have more surface area hitting the pan, which means they're gonna cook up faster and more evenly. You don't have to really guess about when they're done because they're not nearly as thick and they won't fall apart as easily. Spread it out. I want to try to get half in this batch and half in the second one.
What movie are you going to see?
Lilo and Stitch, for the kids, of course. I remember when Lilo and Stitch came out when I was a kid, and I don't think I've seen it since then, so I'm pretty excited. I liked the movie a lot then, so I love, good live action. I think they've been doing them pretty well. They're entertaining, it's, at least they do a good job of entertaining the parents now when you go to movies. Okay, so we're going to halve up our tomatoes. Now, if you find that your knife is slipping on a tomato skin, which I find is the easiest way for me to know whether my knife needs sharpening up, that means it's dull and you just need to sharpen it up with like a honing steel or whatnot. I find the good old honing steel is the best. I've used the fancier knife sharpeners, but the honing steel is so simple to use. It might seem a little, daunting at first, But it's really, it's just, you just gotta, like a pretty easy movement to kind of sharpen your blade. And, you know, and that's what keeps your knives good. I've had my knife for like almost 17 years now. And it still cuts great. I sharpen it probably once a month. And I typically know it's either when I'm cutting onions, tomatoes, or peppers. That's when I know, when I can tell, I can feel it start to snag. And that's when I know I need to sharpen it. And I will say I do a lot of cooking, so my knives get a lot of use out of them. But that's why I love them. I've used, these are the Woodstock Classic. So when I was getting married, I got a set for as a wedding present from my siblings. They all went in together to get me the knives. And they have been going strong ever since. I absolutely love it. I actually added them to my Amazon storefront, which there's a link to that on my profile page, because I'm a fan. I'm only gonna say I like something if I truly like it. And I was lucky, my mom had these in her kitchen when I was growing up. So I was able to, you know, I knew what I liked when I found them, but I love them. Okay, we've got all of our quartered tomatoes here. We're gonna add this to our kind of our butter, onion, and herbs. There we go. Let them saute and kind of blister up. Get them all hit with a nice flavor of those herbs. But we're not going to cook them so much that they reduce down into a sauce or anything. Just a quick kind of saute on them. Okay. And I'm going to prep up this. And then we're kind of on the final stretch. So this is our fresh basil. It'll probably be about 1/4 of a cup when we're all done mincing it up. There we go. We'll add this in just a second. And then we have some fresh spinach. We'll add the basil in last. So we're gonna add in our spinach and we're gonna let it wilt down. Then we'll add in our pasta and let it kind of cook up. So just a really simple flavor to it. Now with spinach, it looks bulky, but this is going to reduce down to absolutely nothing, because spinach just wilts and wilts. But it's so, I will say, it's nice because the flavor is not super overpowering, so my kids don't mind it as much. And it kind of, it shrinks down, so it's a good way to sneak in some more veggies. Let's get these burgers flipping. There we go. So see how we get this lovely golden brown crust on it? That is like what I love about pan-fried little meatballs over doing them in the oven, because they give you that little bit of that kind of crunch, and it's just so delicious. Okay, now we're gonna give them a little smush down. There we go. And then our first batch will be done here. Stir in. Oh, lost. We're gonna coat it up.
Oh, you have a question? Do any of the kids show interest in cooking?
Yeah, actually, like Evie and Torin have been like interested in it. They like to help. You know, I taught Torin how to scramble up his own eggs, so now he's like, I can make breakfast for everybody, and it's cute because he'll scramble up eggs for him, Teddy, and Jack in the morning. And so he has. They always love to help cook. Now, sometimes that help isn't helpful, but they always want to be in there. You know, Chef Teddy, I always say, he typically, if he sees me cooking, he instantly wants to come in. Lost it. Luckily, it had the lid on, and we don't want to lose our olive oil. I've done that once where I knocked olive oil on the ground. Olive oil is one of those things that is impossible to clean up. So we're putting in our orzo. We did toss it again with a little bit of olive oil, so it could kind of come together. Right over here. We're going to coat it, and then we're going to add in a little bit of garlic salt to kind of give the nice flavor. There we go. I'm going to coat this here. Yep, losing a little bit. So very simple pasta. Nothing too crazy about it. But I will say, this is one that it will taste good hot or cold. So that's one thing that's kind of nice about it. We're going to sprinkle a little bit of garlic salt. Kind of season it up. And then we're going to throw in our fresh basil here. And then it should be just about done. We'll top it with a little bit of Parmesan cheese. There we go. Get all this good stuff off. And then I'm going to grab a plate because our burgerettes, our first batch, should be done. So we'll take those off. We'll put the next one in. And then I'll serve up because I'll have enough to make a plating. Let me grab our first set of burgerettes off. And that's the beauty of them. They don't take very long to cook because you've done them in the patty form. And you know, you cook at pretty high heat on the stove. Here I've got it at about a 6, so it's like a medium high. So we've got our first round of burgerettes done. Let's pop our second round in. Add this right over here. We're gonna slide our next ones on, and then I be able to serve up and show you guys how we're gonna eat our dinner tonight. There we go. And I will say, I always try to keep them to the outer ring because that inner one, that's the hottest part of your pan because that's where you get the most heat. So if you keep them all right there, they'll kind of all cook up about the same time. Okay, let me sprinkle my Parmesan over my cheese, or over my pasta. And it will slowly start to melt in. And then we can serve up dinner. Just a nice kind of simple, light dinner. Let me grab a plate. I'm going to show you how we'll serve it up. And let me see if I got my shovel. Love this guy. Okay. So we have our delicious Orzo pasta in kind of a garlic butter olive oil sauce with grape tomatoes, spinach, fresh basil, Parmesan cheese, and just an onion for a wonderful, just kind of light, not super heavy pasta. And we're going to serve it up with our lamb burgerettes that we made using ground lamb. I made a panade using egg, bread, and then we used fresh sage and our onions. And then we will finish for dessert. We have our gorgeous chocolate chip sourdough scones. Look at those lovely layers on there and the beautiful chocolate chips. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try and do live cooking shows every single day, show you what we're making for our family, and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of our recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we cook for, and cook along with me again. We also have our link to our Amazon storefront in our profile page, so if you saw any of the cooking gadgets we were looking at, our spatulas, I've got my 3-quart sauteing, my hex pot in there, they're all in there, you can check them out as well. Well guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't